All right, hello everyone. How great it is to be with you all today. It looks like we have a nice audience. And Cindy and Carrie and I and Joe are sitting here in beautiful downtown Valparaiso. Looking forward to sharing some really exciting thoughts with you today about biomimicry, something that I am not familiar with, but I'm really looking forward to learning a lot about today. My name is Bill Hallier. I'm on the board of directors for the Center for Creative Solutions. Our president is not able to be with us today, Pat Lane. She's not feeling well, but she prepared a few remarks for us today, and I'll be reading these. I guess Carrie put the camera on me. See, I was told that I had a face for radio, and I was planning on being off screen there, but that's all right. You can look at the mountains tonight. But Pat has prepared a few remarks. I'm going to read those for you and maybe add just a few things to them as we go along. Here we go. These are Pat's remarks. On behalf of the Center for Creative Solutions, we welcome you to our 2021 Innovation Forum. And the title of the forum is The Nature of Creativity, the Creativity of Nature. We wish to thank, first of all, the BNR Foundation, Dr. and Bina Gupta, for their continued support and sponsorship of this forum. First of all, a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today, and that is introducing the presenters. First up will be Cindy Hedge, Executive Director of the Center for Creative Solutions, and Carrie Mars-Barron, Executive Director of Porter County Recycling and board member of the Center for Creative Solutions. She's going to do an introduction on biomimicry. And I think Cindy's going to tell us a little bit about the center, all right? We're happy to have Monika, and I'm going to get this wrong, Monika Megyesi, founding partner, you can correct that when you're online here, founding partner of GovernanceAlive, and she'll be with us today. Monika is a certified facilitator, trainer, and expert on sociocracy, which is the topic for today, sociocracy. She's been training organizations and individuals on dynamic decision-making based on becoming more like nature. She'll be presenting on sociocracy as it relates to biomimicry. And then we'll have a final segment, a panel discussion by myself, Cindy, and Carrie, and Kathy Simple. And also we'd like to introduce Kathy. She's a local entrepreneur. She's a student of sociocracy who embodies lifelong learning and is passionate about using nature as inspiration. During this time, the panel will address any questions or comments that we have been added to the chat box by you all who are listening today. And we'll try to answer those questions for all of you. So this forum is being recorded. It will be posted on Facebook, as well as being available on our website, the Center for Creative Solutions website. I did want to mention before we begin too, that besides the forum each fall that we host, we also host activities for World Creativity and Innovation Week, which every year is based around the birth date of Leonardo da Vinci. And this year, the dates of that week are the 15th to the 17th of April. And what we do as a center is encourage folks of the communities that we live and work in to use their creativity in everyday life. And so we've had poetry contests. Cindy, you can read all the different things. How many years have you sponsored the?
I think, Bill, we've been celebrating World Creativity and Innovation Week here in Indiana, probably a good 10 years.
10 years, and Carrie and Cindy and I celebrate creativity every day. So it's a joy for us to make this week special each year, to really encourage people, our friends and families and those people in the community to use their creativity in their daily lives and in their businesses. So without further ado, we hope that you all enjoy the forum, and I will introduce Cindy.
Okay, well, thank you, Bill, and thank you for pitching in there at the last minute. We hope Pat, our president, gets well soon. But anyway, this is actually our 11th annual forum, innovation forum. So we're really excited to be doing this. And at the Center for Creative Solutions, our mission is to encourage a culture of creativity and innovation. And a lot of this has to do with economic development. We know that communities where people are encouraged to be creative, innovative, they are not only more happy, but they are more productive, and their communities do best. So welcome, everybody. I see some familiar names on the screen and some new ones. So we're excited that you are joining us. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about how nature inspires everyday creativity that results in new products, new processes, and new ideas. We're going to talk about what biomimicry is, how it connects to nature and our ability to solve complicated problems, and how we can learn from nature, because it has a lot to teach us. And then we're going to give you some practical examples of biomimicry. Carrie's going to give us some examples, and then, of course, the main focus is going to be on Monika, talking about governance and what we can learn about from nature on governance. So think, if you would, how good do you think you would be at creativity and innovation if you were doing it for the last 3.8 billion years? Do you think you would be pretty good? My prediction is you'd be excellent at being creative and innovative, because it all has to do with your survival. And this is exactly what nature has been doing for, according to scientists, 3.8 billion years. So it's been evolving, and there's so much that we can learn by just observing what nature is telling us and showing us. So some say that innovation, biomimicry is innovation that is inspired by nature, and indeed it is. So technically, when I think of biomimicry, I think of it's observing and mimicking nature's models, systems, processes, and designs to solve complicated problems. It's making connections between nature and current problems. Steve Jobs, great innovator, once defined creativity as just connecting things. So biomimicry is kind of a new term within the last 20, 25 years, but it's a concept in creativity that's been around since the beginning of time. So today we see organizations, designers, engineers, business leaders, organizations, architects, and other kinds of innovators looking to nature to see what we can learn and how we can mimic what nature has perfected for us to generate new ideas and new products and new processes. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Carrie Mars-Barone, who is going to be talking about some examples, everyday examples, things that maybe you don't think about. Actually, the ideas for these came from people observing nature and developing products, processes. So Carrie, take it away.
Thanks, Cindy. I'm going to zoom in here. So one of our first example, and there's a lot of examples, so we're just going to kind of go through these pretty quickly. If you happen to notice, this is a bird. You think of the flights, you think of Da Vinci. If you actually think of Da Vinci and his first starting, many of his drawings are looking at wingspans. It's looking at coming up with creativity. When you think of, we're in Northwest Indiana, we're very blessed to have the dunes with us. There are so many reports that Octave Chanute, studied on the dunes observing flight. So you think of Da Vinci, you study, Chanute studied he watched the birds to come up with the hang glider, and then we follow right in suit with the Wright brothers. So these are all traits that have been observed through nature. So next time you're outside, make sure you look up and you watch those birds and how they soar. So I wore my cardinal today on my sweater. So it is winter, 20 degrees here. So if you're somewhere warm, well, enjoy that. We're enjoying the cold as well, and winter cardinals. So next photo is going right into these amazing mountain goats. So if you do not know the story of Nike, this is a really interesting story. It's called the GoTech, the boot, and it's they studied the I believe his name is Mike, and he studied the history of the goats on how they could walk through this area, and it was cold and their feet stayed warm, and yet they still had a cushion and they were able to keep the soles of their feet protected. So they looked at these mountain goats and created a sole and a shoe, and Nike embraced it, and they designed a shoe and looked at it, and it's a hiking boot, and it's actually even the lower boot so people can wear them as they walk outdoors in the winter and still have comfort. So Nike embraced this. And then the next example is probably my favorite one. This is the kingfish bird. If you know anything about the kingfish bird, they're very sleek, they're very quiet, and they have this long beak. And the long beak is used for them entering the water. And when they enter the water, it is based off sound waves. But because the beak is so long and narrow, their prey do not even realize they're entering. So when they enter the water, they grab their breakfast, their lunch, they sneak right in, and it's they grab their lunch. Well, Japan created the bullet train. And what they've noticed is, if you think about it, these high-speed trains come out of a tunnel. And as they come out of the tunnel, the same physics, the sound wave principles apply. It's this loud boom, this loud noise. So this design of, you look at the front engine of the front, that is designed like a bullet train. The bullet train is designed like the kingfish bird. So it is all based off the science and physics principles of the way sound hits air when you switch your environment. So next one up is the African termite mounds. If you know anything about African termite mounds, they're really tall, number one. Number two, it's very warm in the environment that they're in. So the termites have been able to live, they've been able to keep cool, they keep their structure, and they keep it all, they actually reduce energy by setting up the structure. So if you see in the below picture, the same thing has happened. They've taken they look like a condo build, and what they're doing is they're reducing the energy consumption because of the way that they can hold. They're modeling these same termite mounds so that the energy consumption is reduced. We're using less energy in nature, and the coolness is remaining in the building. So, sorry. Geckos, not Geico, but they are certainly off the same model. If you notice, if you're looking at their feet are, it looks like they are actually attached to the camera lens when they take this picture. They have a whole bunch of hairs on their feet that then actually break into another hairs, and it's a whole nother biological and science lesson, but the simplicity is it's just a hair. And what happens is there's so many of them that actually allows for a glass adhesive. So you're able to stick to things. So if you think of geckos and you think of the way that they maneuver, they've developed different materials that follow right in that same different adhesive material. Am I still on time? Are we okay on time? Okay. We have a couple more examples. Corals and butterflies, these are pretty neat. This is a whole chemical. The way that if you think of how butterflies and corals happen naturally in the environment, they naturally have chemical compositions where they change and their colors change. And in today's world, they've now developed paints following these same color suits, following these biochemical reactions, we're embracing and looking at the textiles and the textures and the way that chemistry reaction happens. Here are a couple of different examples underwater. So you have shark skin. Shark skin protects boats. And then if you also look underneath, if you're looking, that picture is actually a whole bunch of encrusted, it's a cruise ship, it's a ship that goes in water. You think of all the things that are attached, and every time they're in and out of the water, they're having to clean off these ships because things are attaching from the marine environment. And, it takes time, and they decided to research shark skin, and as shark skin, as the different fish follow, nothing is attaching to the skin. So they embrace the same model of what is happening to the skin. They've mimicked a solution, and they now treat the ships, and the ships also now no longer keep all the barnacles and all of the things attached. You can also apply that into that picture on the lower corner right is a operating room. And so you think about being in an operating room and all of the difference. You want to make sure you're in a clean environment. You have clean, it is infection free because of what you're processing and doing. And that is another biomimicry that has been able to apply from shark skin in order to principles in the medical world right now. And last, but certainly not, woodpeckers. Woodpeckers, if you think of them, this is how they are designed outdoors, unfortunately. It's a beautiful sound, and they actually have technologies we use today that absorb shock. In the woodpecker, they actually have 4 different structures anatomically that absorb the absorb the shock from as much as they peck into the trees and the woods. So I was thinking of this earlier today. If you think of the technologies that you now see amongst helmets across all different athletics, from football to bicycling to all different sporting, that I'm sure has been learned certainly from the mimicking of the woodpeckers technology. So that's just our quick overview, Cindy, of some of the different ideas of biomimicry.
So at this point, Carrie, I think we can turn it over to Monika.
We can, but before we jump in a little bit further, I just wanted to make a reminder, if you're new to the Teams app, across the top of your screen, you'll see a chat bubble. And if you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to go ahead and enter in the chat, enter in a question. We'd be happy to answer it. I know afterwards in the panel we'll answer them. If you have questions for Monika, we just wanted to make sure you do know this is being recorded and we are answering the questions. So just please feel free to keep things going.
Okay, Monika, we're going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I am going to share my screen and make sure that you see the right screen. There we go. I am so honored to be at the Center for Creative Solutions Fall Innovation Forum focusing on biomimicry. My name is Monika Megyesi. Thank you for the lovely introduction, and I'm with GovernanceAlive. My particular application of biomimicry is to human organizational systems, specifically how to decide, organize, and connect together in a way that not only as individuals, but as an organization as a whole, or as an organism, we feel more alive. Today, we'll explore together the wisdom that living systems teach us and learn about sociocratic tools that enable regenerative action. The tools that I present come from sociocracy, which is basically a governance model built on equivalence, transparency, and agility as values. Let us get started, literally and figuratively, with a blank page and create a context for the conversation that we'll be having today. I'd like to introduce you to the concept of fractal evolution pioneered by Bruce Lipton. Fractals are amazing phenomena in nature that are created by taking simple shapes or patterns and repeating them over and over again in the same way. We'll see some examples soon. Bruce Lipton is a cell biologist, and he has observed the phenomena that microorganisms repeat a fractal pattern in their evolution. And this simple pattern that they repeat starts with the individual. Then individuals become communities that learn to function as one. Then communities come together into a higher level complex organism, and they learn to function as one together. Some examples are bacteria. They are microorganisms that can survive just fine on their own. They also have the ability to create communities, form a biofilm around themselves, and coordinate their functions as one. Then, when multiple communities come together, they learn to coordinate and collaborate and give rise to the amoeba, which is still a single cell organism but can perform much higher functions. And the amoeba starts the next evolutionary step. Multiple amoeba join into a colony. They learn to function together as one. And then these colonies come together, and in messier, not as linear iterations, they end up forming the organism that is now the human being. As humans, we are manifestations of millions of communities of bacteria. I've been told that only 15 to 30% of our mass is actual matter. The rest is bacteria that is manifesting as us, a higher level, more complex organism. Now, if we apply this fractal pattern to the evolution of the human being, we've pretty much moved beyond the evolution of the human body and have started experimenting with various iterations of communities, starting with families that gather together in clans, that gather together in tribes, villages, kingdoms, nations. More and more, our communal boundaries keep merging together, and we are becoming more globalized. Our next evolutionary step is for all of our communities to cohere together into one humanity. For this humanity to live in a symbiotic, regenerative relationship with the planet, we need to acquire some skills that we currently don't necessarily practice. And nature is a treasure trove of time-tested, efficient, and regenerative solutions. So let's look at one of nature's solutions for how to decide together as one humanity. Nature, the ninth brain is one of nature's implementations for how do you take unique, diverse brains and help them function together as one. Evolutionarily, this is demonstrated by the octopus, a life form that has multiple brains. There is a brain in each of the tentacles, and they are unique enough to allow each tentacle to sense and behave independently, to the point that from a human perspective, they tend to manifest different personalities. Some tend to be more adventurous, some are impulsive, others are shy. There is also a ninth brain that is very different from the other brains. Its role is to network the 8 brains, and we call this facilitative integration function. This is different from command and control. The octopus would have not survived as a species if the ninth brain would have a command and control function. Facilitative integration means that instead of judging who's right or who's wrong when the tentacles have a conflict, instead of making an either or choice, you win, you lose, the ninth brain makes a both and choice. It honors the realities of seemingly conflicting tentacles as if both of those realities were true, and look at what might stand in the way of honoring both of those realities. We know this system works because the octopus is the most intelligent invertebrate life form, to the point that it solves problems like opening child-proof containers. It plays tricks on scientists. They fiddle with water spigots and flood laboratories. They shoot water at light bulbs. And scientists were not understanding why every morning the lab was either flooded or the lights were out, where they installed cameras to figure out what's going on, and they found out that the octopus was the culprit. I'm also told that other than humans, the octopus is the only species that throws rocks in the context of a fight. Now that we have awareness of this facilitative integration function, how do we do it? Sociocracy uses consent decision making, which is the idea that, or the concept that an idea or actionable way forward is implemented if it is proposed, unless someone has a beheaded objection. A beheaded objection literally means a heavy feeling in the body. Some people recognizes it as a knot in the stomach, tightness in the chest, you can't breathe, knot in the throat, heaviness in limbs as if you have lead in your limbs, or a general somatic sense of resistance against an idea or shrinking your inner self away from the situation. Using beheaded objections in consent decision making adds the wisdom of the body to the intelligence of the mind. And now that we have a way to make wiser decisions together, let's look at the context in which we make those decisions. How can we organize ourselves in more organic ways? When it comes to organizing together, perspective matters. We are familiar with the traditional representation of an organizational structure. We have a board of directors, we have an executive director or a CEO, we have senior manager that lead teams, and so forth. Now let's look at nature's solution and feel a sense of awe of how nature is not only beautiful, but also flips the structure on its head. Think of the roots of the tree as the board of directors, the CEO or the ED and the first level managers as the trunk, and everybody else as the branches of the tree that produce fruit. And when I say perspective, if you look at what these people do on a day-to-day basis, in either one of the structures, it will be the same. The social media person will be posting things on social media, the bookkeeper will be crunching numbers, but in the first structure, the top-down structure, it does it in a command and control context where people at the top set the guidelines, directions for how to do things below at a more detailed level. And when you change the perspective of an organizational structure or a hierarchy on its head, and the board's role suddenly becomes to ground the organization into the environment, to make it stable, to make sure it's not blown by the wind. Its job is to suck up the nutrients that the branches need in order to produce fruit and to connect to other trees in the environment to share resources. So now we have a not only much more abundant outcome or production of fruits, but also people's experience within the structure is very different. It is more life-giving. But nature does more than flip the hierarchy on its head. It augments it with circles and fractals. Remember that a fractal is a simple shape or pattern that repeats itself over and over in the same way. This is how nature creates beauty and complexity, by continually repeating simple forms. And our world is, as you can see, abundant with illustrations of how linear and circular structures are combined in fractal patterns. And so if we look at the linear structure and supplement it with a circle structure, we get two very different systems. Whichever image you're looking at, in the end, you're looking at the same thing. They are two different sides of the same coin. For example, here is a colorful representation of the teams in the linear structure. And here it is how they appear in a circle structure. These people have the choice, freedom, ability to convene in a linear structure and into a circular one. The reason they may want to do that, and they would want to do both, is because the linear structure brings order, clarity, efficiency to systems. However, they are not the right place to make decisions about the whole. For that, you need circle structures which create a context of equivalence. And equivalence means that everyone has the same, everyone's voice is honored and no input is ignored. So decisions are best made in circles. For example, planning, measuring, deciding how we are going to do things together. Once we have the decision and we know what we do, we go into the linear structure implemented, then we come back into the circle structure and decide what else do we need to change, how else can we improve this decision. And that way we are not stuck to one solution, but we are using various designs that exist for the appropriate function to harness most of the benefits from them. Now, we know how to decide together, we know how to organize together. Let us look at how we connect together. Nature is full of two-directional, meaningful, mutually beneficial exchanges. The flower gets pollinated so that it can reproduce and perpetuate itself. The bee gets nourishes itself. The lichen and fungus exchange phytonutrients and minerals with the tree. Neither organism could have had obtained on their own. I am constantly in awe every time I walk outside at the idea that I am breathing with the plants. They exhale oxygen, which I inhale, and I exhale carbon dioxide, which they need for their own functions. It's a two-way, mutually beneficial, meaningful exchange. An additional example would be the anemone providing protection services in exchange for cleaning services provided by the fish. So, I mean, this barely scratches the surface of two-way, meaningful, and mutually beneficial exchanges in nature. So let's see how this applies to human systems. In our human constructs, we are primarily single-linked. What that means is in an organization, the leader or the manager comes down to the lower level of abstraction or the team to manage what they deliver. What we can do to mimic nature is to elect a representative that goes from the team up to the management circle or management team, and the representative makes decisions by consent together with the leader at that level of abstraction. This is mutually beneficial because the leader is in charge of delivering the aim, the product that that team needs to produce. and the representative carries the diversity of perspectives that exists in the team to the higher level so that they have a voice in the decisions affecting them. And two people participating with their consent in decision-making at both organizational levels is what we call double linking. Now, let's see a practical implementation of double linking. Consider these circles or teams, organizational functions. Some of these people are in charge of finances and do bookkeeping and reporting. Other people here are in charge of growth and community building, so they work on social media and content and messaging and so forth. Each team has their own function. And as each team has a leader who makes sure that the team is organized and cohesive, each team elects a representative. These leaders and representatives come together to coordinate the organizational ecosystem and make sure that it makes sense, it's meaningful, and that no input is ignored from the various functions within the ecosystem. This double linking concept, the idea of two-way, meaningful, and mutually beneficial exchanges, can be applied not only at the organizational level, but also at the program levels in the decisions that you make about how you do things. And I'd like to demonstrate how you can build this into programs. Right hot off the press, GovernanceAlive has just, in a way, created this scholarship program. And in fact, this is a special conference gift because you are the first one to hear about this. It's not even on our website yet. And we, as an organization, because we are committed to working towards a more coherent, symbiotic, and regenerative humanity, we see how the world is changing. The age of participation is upon us, where being not only surviving, but being cutting edge depends on the ability to innovate by incorporating diverse perspectives. And in this new world, the ability to facilitate things like consent decisions using beheaded objections, it's going to become a valuable skill. So instead of us doing like a one-way scholarship, we let people come because we want to make it accessible to them, it would deplete us and our resources. If we give discounts, that's a little bit better, but it doesn't quite hit the mark. What we learned from two-way, meaningful, mutually beneficial exchanges is to offer a scholarship program that is based on value exchange. In exchange for the facilitation skills that we offer, people help support and build our GovernanceAlive programs. If you go to our link, governancealive.com/change the world, and scroll down on the page, you will find more information on how we structured the program, how we put it in place. And I'm hoping that this is going to be an inspiration for you to design your own two-way exchanges. And as I'm coming towards the end of my presentation, I would like to offer an additional inspiration from the slime mold.
I'd like to introduce you to an organism, a slime mold, Physarum polycephalum. It's a mold with an identity crisis because it's not a mold, so let's get that straight to start with. It is one of 700 known slime molds belonging to the kingdom of the amoeba. It is a single-celled organism, a cell, that joins together with other cells to form a mass supercell to maximize its resources. So within a slime mold, you might find thousands or millions of nuclei, all sharing a cell wall, all operating as one entity. In its natural habitat, you might find the slime mold foraging in woodlands, eating rotting vegetation. But you might equally find it in research laboratories, classrooms, and even artist studios. I first came across the slime mold about 5 years ago. A microbiologist friend of mine gave me a petri dish with a little yellow blob in it and told me to go home and play with it. The only instructions I were given that it likes it dark and damp, and its favourite food is porridge oats. I'm an artist who's worked for many years with biology, with scientific processes. So living material is not uncommon for me. I've worked with plants, bacteria, cuttlefish, fruit flies. So I was keen to get my new collaborator home to see what it could do. So I took it home and I watched. I fed it a varied diet. I observed as it networked, it formed a connection between food sources. I watched it leave a trail behind it, indicating where it had been. And I noticed that when it was fed up with one petri dish, it would escape and find a better home. I captured my observations through time-lapse photography. Slime mold grows at about 1 centimetre an hour, so it's not really ideal for live viewing unless there's some form of really extreme meditation. But through the time-lapse, I could observe some really interesting behaviours. For instance, having fed on a nice pile of oats, the slime mold goes off to explore new territories in different directions simultaneously. When it meets itself, it knows it's already there, it recognizes it's there, and instead retreats back and grows in other directions. I was quite impressed by this feat, how what was essentially just a bag of cellular slime could somehow map its territory, know itself, and move with seeming intention. I found countless scientific studies, research papers, journal articles, all citing incredible work with this one organism. I'm going to share a few of those with you. For example, a team in Hokkaido University in Japan filled a maze with slime mold. It joined together and formed a mass cell. They introduced food at 2 points, oats, of course, and it formed a connection between the food. It retracted from empty areas and dead ends. There are 4 possible routes through this maze, yet time and time again, the slime mold established the shortest and the most efficient route. Quite clever. The conclusion from their experiment was that the slime mold had a primitive form of intelligence. Another study exposed cold air at regular intervals to the slime mold. It didn't like it, doesn't like it cold, doesn't like it dry. They did this at repeat intervals, and each time the slime mold slowed down its growth in response. However, the next interval, the researchers didn't put the cold air on, yet the slime mold slowed down in anticipation of it happening. It somehow knew that it was about the time for the cold air that it didn't like. The conclusion from their experiment was that the slime mold was able to learn. A third experiment. The slime mold was invited to explore a territory covered in oats. It fans out in a branching pattern. As it goes, each food node it finds, it forms a network connection to and keeps foraging. After 26 hours, it established quite a firm network between the different oats. Now, there's nothing remarkable in this until you learn that the center oat that it started from represents the city of Tokyo, and the surrounding oats are suburban railway stations. The slime mold had replicated the Tokyo transport network. A complex system developed over time by community dwelling, civil engineering, urban planning, what taken us well over 100 years took the slime mold just over a day. The conclusion from their experiment was that the slime mold can form efficient networks and solve the travelling salesman problem. It is a biological computer. As such, it has been mathematically modelled, algorithmically analysed, it's been sonified, replicated, simulated. World over, teams of researchers are decoding its biological principles to understand its computational rules and applying that learning to the fields of electronics, programming, and robotics. So the question is, how does this thing work? It doesn't have a central nervous system. It doesn't have a brain, yet it can perform behaviors that we associate with brain function. It can learn, it can remember, it can solve problems, it can make decisions. So where does that intelligence lie? So this is a microscopy video I shot, and it's about 100 times magnification, sped up to about 20 times. And inside the slime mold, there is a rhythmic pulsing flow, a vein-like structure carrying cellular material, nutrients, and chemical information through the cell, streaming first in one direction and then back in another. And it is this continuous, synchronous oscillation within the cell that allows it to form quite a complex understanding of its environment, but without any large-scale control center. This is where its intelligence lies.
And I invite you to finish watching Heather Barnett's video where she talks more about her art. But every time I feel hopeless or a sense of desperation about our human systems being heavy, rigid, or not being able to shift, the slime mold always gives me a beacon of hope. It demonstrates how it's absolutely possible for us humans to become coherent, symbiotic, regenerative humanity. These single-cell organisms, these amoeba, can totally survive by themselves on their own in the woods, and they can also convene into a higher level of being that not only recognizes itself when it meets itself. I mean, wow. It learns, it anticipates, it solves problems efficiently, and it does that without having a central nervous system. Their blueprint is very similar to the blueprint that our one humanity working together would have. And it develops a consciousness of the whole via the two-directional, meaningful, mutually beneficial exchanges. If you remember this continuous fluctuating, oscillating, in which it senses its environment, that's the organizing part of us convening into circle, making decisions, getting into a linear structure and implementing them, coming back into the circle, make decisions, go back into the linear structure, and efficiently and effectively carry out those decisions. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. And at this Biomimicry Innovation Forum, I'd like to invite you, make the call to action to awaken to life yourself, your communities as ecosystems of lively, multi-hearted beings, because I believe that what organizations are, beings that are multi-hearted and have their own consciousness and agency. And to become this ecosystem of lively, multi-hearted being by deciding, organizing, and connecting the way nature does. Thank you.
So I'm going to start out here, if I may. First of all, thank you, Monika, for really extending my knowledge of biomimicry. When I think of biomimicry, I think of it as a process that helps people become creative and that applies to every aspect of our life, whether that's work or at home. So thank you for extending our knowledge as to how biomimicry can work in an organization. So secondly, I want to invite everybody to put any questions or comments in the chat box. We would appreciate that. We're going to now at this point go into a panel discussion, and I'm going to start out with a question, and I'm going to direct it to you, Monika, in particular. Kathy, I know that you have been involved in this area of biomimicry quite a bit, so you are welcome to chime in as well as our other panelists, which is Bill Hellier and Carrie Mars-Barone. So here's the question. It's kind of a twofold question. So Monika, could you give us some examples of maybe some organizations that you've worked with that have incorporated the concepts of this topic, and what impact that has made in those kind of organizations?
Absolutely. Some of these concepts have been implemented in a variety of organizations. The model fits well for-profit organizations, for example, Creative Uretanes. They manufacture and specialize in and have a niche market in skateboard wheels. And one thing that they were able to accomplish during a recession, when their CEO was absolutely panicking of, I forget exactly what the recession was about, but they need to let people go on a mass scale. And the CEO didn't know how to handle this organization. So in that ecosystem circle, people came together and made decisions for themselves of, Bill's kid just entered college. He definitely needs his job. I am more secure in my finances, so I can yield my job to someone else. And they made the plans that they needed to not only survive the crisis situation, but also had plans in place for how to bring people back when the situation stabilizes. There are children's parliaments in India where children organize in circles and make decisions together, and they have addressed amazing problems, such as they've coordinated the building of bridges because their teammates were not able to make it to school in the heavy rain season, was washing the land away. So they managed to build a bridge so everybody could make it to school on time. They have addressed the issue of child marriage. So incredible feats when people bring their minds together in a context of equivalence. There are nonprofits like assisted living facilities that are earning reward after reward for the not only the way in how they run their organization, but the well-being and the health of the people that they are caring for. There are universities and schools that have proved that children have a higher level of tested on a higher level of development because the decisions that were made for using consent and were involving the children in how to educate them. And I can say a number of examples, and I would also like to introduce Kathy Sippel, who is my partner in studying and practicing sociocracy. And one thing that I would like to say about her is not only is she local to all of you, but she is an amazing practitioner who has started bringing this modality to communities around her.
Thank you, Monika. Well, you just talked about building a bridge. I'd love to build a quick bridge, a word picture of 2016. The very first day of 2016, I actually had an inspiration from a tree, it turns out. I visit a very special tree up at the Indiana Dunes State Park. We now have a national park here in our area, but this is in the state park. And I was inspired through hugging that tree which I believe is a mother tree in the forest. Like the mother trees, if you don't know, they're fascinating what they're learning in science right now about the way that mother trees feed the rest of the forest through their roots, through a symbiotic connection with the mycelial network. That's how they kind of move nutrients through the forest. I was inspired by that tree to start a time bank. And the time bank was the thing that got me inducted into the Purdue Society of Innovators, which is kind of where I re-met Cindy again. And Bill Hallier, who was on this call, was actually one of the people who nominated me. So as that time bank leader, I was that top-down leader that Monika showed at first. I was trying to do it all. People kept calling it Kathy's Time Bank. That's not the way that a grassroots organization is supposed to work. But I was kind of at a pain point because I didn't know. I didn't know where to learn this. So I struggled and I struggled. And I just had this beautiful image of how society could be more like the forest and have that equivalence. And it just wasn't anything I ever learned in my education. So I had to kind of by circumstance, I was lucky enough to be hooked up through somebody else to Monika. And I've been on this sociocracy journey for now about 18 months. I started as a marketing consultant, helping them explain what they do, to the world. And I quickly just became, enamored of what they were doing. And I saw how that was just the next phase of what I wanted to do. A lot of people know me as a social media person, and that's great for connecting, but it stops short of showing us how to intelligently organize. And that's the part I'm excited about. So back to you, Cindy. That was a long, long thing for me.
So Kathy, I've been a part of your time bank, and it's a great concept. So how did learning about sociocracy help you manage this organization that you created?
Well, that's a great question. I am still learning, and it does take time. So during COVID, it hasn't been the greatest time to assemble people. But you bring up a great point. I definitely want to do a reboot of the time bank now that I know sociocracy, and I will definitely use it during the relaunch. Even without knowing sociocracy, one thing that I did know about was permaculture. And so for me, that's another way that nature informs, systems. And if I can just bring this up, permaculture, for somebody who doesn't know, it's a portmanteau of the two words permanent plus agriculture, or even just culture, if you want to look at it for social systems. And when I started the time bank, I named it Co-Thrive. And our logo is actually a very stylized version of what in the Native American tradition is called the Three Sisters. Three sisters are corns, beans, and squash that, if all planted together in the same hole or in the same garden plot, they actually are mutually supportive. The corn becomes a natural trellis for the beans. The beans need something to climb. The beans can fix nitrogen from the air that neither the corn nor the squash can do. So they can bring the food, for the other two sisters. And then the squash, with their large leaves, they kind of are a natural weed suppressant and also keep the roots cool. So I happen to be one of three sisters, so that analogy really, really, calls to me. But I thought, how can we in society form these guilds like they do in the garden, where we can be of mutual support? And Cindy, in 2016, you actually asked me to be one of your speakers. I think it was 2016 for the Spring Forum. And we talked about time banking in a particular application, which happened to be making it more affordable for artists to live and thrive. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I do, Kathy. That was an excellent presentation.
Yeah. And so I was thinking today that it was research for that exact presentation that led me down to Grovertown, Indiana, to the Hope Center. And I think I spent like $10 and filled up an entire table of delicious food. And I was doing it to, kind of like a mother tree. Like, well, how can I be the one that goes and gets the nutrients and then brings it to these we hear starving artist. Well, I don't want artists to be starving in our neck of the woods. So how can we look at the system of how to play with that? So I just love that here we are again, 5 years later. And because of organizations like yours, you keep pushing me to become more innovative. I didn't want to just say, oh, great, thanks for inducting me. Let's stop now. Being part of your team for a while and being part of these pop-up events, I love how you're just, nurturing a culture of innovation and creativity and, sharing what you learn, and I'm able to share what I learn, and that we put it all together, and who knows what's going to come next year.
Absolutely. So I don't want to dominate this conversation. Carrie and Bill, you're here, part of our panel as well. I don't know if there's anything you want to chime in on and share with us, or any questions that you might have.
Kathy and Monika, I was just wondering how just thinking of problem solving, how this might differ from brainstorming, for instance, as a method of coming up with new ideas and being creative.
Yeah, I'll try an answer for this, and then if Monika has something to add, I'd certainly welcome her, much longer time with it. Brainstorming is a tool that can be used, within sociocracy, but brainstorming doesn't have, double linking. It doesn't have, the setup, the structure, the underlying framework that Monika introduced. So I think that it can definitely be a both and situation, Bill. But if you just have brainstorming, you don't necessarily have a way to get to consent. You don't have equivalence necessarily. It can be just the loudest voice or the person with the most ideas dominates the conversation. But
I think that's what I missed, was that consent aspect of it.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a little hard to put all of, what sociocracy does into this, brief time. But I hope that the offer of, the scholarship, or I think after January, after this offer is through, they may go back to free webinars where you can get kind of an experience of how consent decision making works. And if you even want to do it for your own organization, that's something Monika and her partner, John Buck, offer, is a free taste of sociocracy, so that you can get a little, I think it's free at this point. I told them they should charge for that, but it is free. So if you've got an organizational decision that you're trying to make, you can actually book a session with Monika, and maybe she'd let me be a helper. That would be really fun and cool to help out with it, where you get to actually experience, oh, how was that different? How did they draw that out from me, my own wisdom, and how did we draw out the wisdom of the group without it just, being kind of like spray and pray, just everybody dumping ideas. So I hope that helps, Bill. Is that a good answer?
It does. I'd really like to see it in practice. And even amongst our group here at the center, we frequently have wonderful discussions.
I would love that too. Please take her up on that offer and you can experience it.
Carrie?
I have just been intrigued by, I think the thing that keeps me going on this panel is how similar many of the tools and many of the things that we do in the Center for Creative Problem Solving. I think of, just the different, like you said, in regards to brainstorming, how you use that as one tool and then you keep the tools going. But at the same time, we look at nature for our inspirations and to keep creativity alive and moving and changing and solving problems. So I'm really excited to see the parallels between creativity and the sociocratic based methodologies, because I think when you look at creativity from organizations, and the organization I work for, I think I try to practice this every day. It's not a leader down, it's literally a people up. And so, my staff are what drive what our decisions. So it does become this double linking, which is really important. A symbiotic relationship, and the symbiotic of nature, symbiotic in your organization, and then the growth and creativity is that what we get from each other, that it inspires and moves the whole organization forward. So we need to just practice it more in communities where it's not just the same committee who meets all the time and makes the decisions. It's this symbiosis that's happening across organizations and groups, and then we collectively come together as the ecosystems. And we make a joke in the creativity world, it takes longer because when you get more people involved to make those decisions.
Okay, I'm not sure if anybody can still hear me.
I can still hear you.
Okay, my screen froze with Carrie. Okay, Carrie, we lost the last part of what you said, I think, or at least I did. Well, should I jump in? I heard you saying, making sure it's not the same committee over and over again. Like what was coming into my mind was Monika's example of the slime mold, how it finds itself, so when you find yourself as that busy committee person, and here I am again, and here I am again, it seems like if you have this master map of, communities, and they can even be linked, it seems like this could really scale. And we're just at a time, in society where we need this nature wisdom, we need this organization to connect organizations. I know there are some people from organizations on this call that I would love to see this master map of how this could look if we were sharing our wisdom, not only within an organization, but among organizations as well. And so I think there are some organizations out there like yours, Cindy, that are kind of meta organizations. They're, organizers of people who are creative, and same with the Society of Innovators. It was great to see Jason on here before. So I'm hoping that he'll be able to share this with, some of the Innovative Society. It looks like you guys got sound back again.
I think we do. So thank you for your patience with us. But I'm going to pivot a little bit. We only have a few minutes left, but I'm going to ask both of my colleagues to the right and to my left, which is Bill and Carrie. I know, for example, Bill, you are a super creative guy and have a lot of patents in with your name, and Carrie, I know that you actually have a master's degree in creativity. So, can you share with us in these parting moments how nature enters your ability to be more creative and to help you tap into your creativity, just generally speaking?
Certainly, Cindy, I'm happy to easily do this. I love to look at the clouds. So I am an always on the go, always on the run. I'm sitting here in dress clothes and my tennis shoes because as Kathy said, where am I running next? And you know what, when I look to the clouds and look to nature, it quiets all of my thoughts and literally puts me in awe, whether it be the stars, whether it be the moon, whether it be the sunrise, or even just the clouds. And that quietness is just what gets my the water crashing. I mean, just using all of the senses we're given, and to hear that or to see it or to smell it. I love Christmas. My Christmas evergreen car smelly on the drive here already put me in childhood memories. So all my creativity is sparked because of nature.
Bill, how would you answer that question?
Well, that's interesting. I was really blessed to have the kind of a job where it was in engineering, but I wasn't tied to a desk.
There we go.
And had no one looking over my shoulder. And like Carrie, frequently, if I was confronted with a problem, I took a lot of walks. Mm-hmm. And it was just nice to go out and breathe the fresh air and look around and be inspired and kind of free your mind from the problems at hand and let them go back into the subconscious and almost solve themselves. Mm-hmm. As you're out just enjoying a nice walk or filling your lungs with some good oxygen, and feeling good about being out there in nature.
Well, and I think some of the most creative people that we know
sure.
Talked about, for example, walking as a way to
Bach and Beethoven.
Yeah, exactly. Walt Whitman, Tesla, Einstein, right. The creative greats. So nature really does can really be a valuable resource just in sparking our creativity. Well, I don't see any questions in the chat box. Any of our panelists want to say anything in parting?
Well, if I could just put it out there as an offer, if anybody is curious about, time banking, local food, sociocracy here locally, anything that I've mentioned, I would just say, please reach out to me. My website is kathysippel.com. That's one way to get to me. I'm on all the social medias. You can find me at Kathy Sippel, but I would love to, just offer a follow-up to anybody that wants to know how to get involved in, in some of these projects or this work. And one thing too, that I'm actually hoping to be working with Carrie on next year is I use sociocracy to organize people locally to do the state's first ever regional greenhouse gas inventory. So we just finished that up. That was a historic first for the state of Indiana. And we're working on a regional climate action plan next year. And so if that has any interest for you, I'm imagining that we'll be organizing in sociocratic circles to come up with local climate solutions. I don't have that completely all figured out yet, but I would love to talk with any or all of you about that. Thanks for having me, Cindy.
Well, thank you, and thank you to all our panelists. And like Kathy, we are a resource in our area, and the center, as Bill mentioned to you, for before, we sponsor 2 annual events. This innovation forum. Who knows what it's going to look like next year? It might be live in person again, or it might be virtual. But we do that, and then in the spring we celebrate World Creativity and Innovation Week, which is an exciting time for everyone to think about their creativity and how that impacts their life. And in addition to that, at the Center for Creative Solutions, we have programs throughout the year in which we try, again, to encourage groups, communities, businesses, and schools, other organizations, really to tap into their creative side to come up with new ideas for sometimes very complicated problems. So we appreciate your attending this webinar. And just one further thing, to reach us, you can go to our website, which is centerforcreativesolutions.com. And you can email us at creativity52 at comcast.net. And you can telephone us at 219-326-7259. So again, thank you for attending. We hope that this information has been helpful for you, and we look forward to seeing and hearing from you in the next year. Thank you.
Thank you.